And now we're happy to address any questions you have about data mining and predictive analytics. This is the free consulting segment of our webinar, open access to the modeling agency's advanced analytic gurus, senior consultants Keith McCormick and Scott Terry. So each question you submit will receive, like I say, multiple perspectives. We do have a few great questions coming in now, room for a few more. So just enter your questions into the text field of the webinar panel, and I'll be pleased to read them aloud for Scott, Keith, or myself to respond. So let's start with this one. Very interesting question. Keith is back. Great. From Pavel, hopefully I got pronunciation correct. Referring to your experiences from real-world projects, I'd like to learn how you deal with requirements coming in kind of agile fashion when the customer comes up with new ideas that they'd like to get out of the system, which often breaks the fundamental architecture or your complete analytical setup. What strategies do you recommend, and how would you deal with this, with the agile trends in terms of predictive analytics projects? Well, Pavel, I wish we had an answer for you, but that never happens. Okay, I'm kidding. And I know some people have their button muted because otherwise we'd be hearing laughter in the background, but because that happens all the time. So I'll give a broad brush on this. I always have trouble yielding and allowing others to answer first, so I will promise to do that on the next questions here. But I'll start off by saying the first thing that we do is a comprehensive assessment. So we encourage all the questions up front that can be considered. And usually when we go into an organization, they have, say, 2, 3, 4 ideas of projects that they'd like to approach. And that's great, but what we want them to do is brainstorm well beyond that, because the next phase we're going to go into is to see which of those potential projects are valid. Do we have resources that support the objectives that have been expressed? Can the environment support it reasonably? Is it of importance to those who are going to ultimately adopt it? Is it truly deployable? So we want to try to populate those ideas to a much larger set from which they can survive the validation that we go through during a more comprehensive assessment. There's also other expectations that we want to level during that time and try to bring the future into the present as much as possible. Now, having done that, absolutely, there's still going to be realities that trickle in. It happens all the time. And from a consultant's point of view, that also affects more than just the implementation. It requires change orders and the like. So what we have to do is, when we talk about that modeling practice framework, it is a framework. It does allow flexibility. And what we have to do is weigh in the importance of those changes, the new ideas, and look at the implications of them. Is this something that we want to weave into the structure that we designed for implementation that came in? And don't forget, this is, to some extent, a discovery process. There are going to be some discoveries that could influence some redirection. At the same time, because of the way that the models are built, it's a cyclical process. We build in the fact that we're going to have some new insights, that we need to go back and adjust the way that we prepare the data because of what we could not have known earlier in the cycle. So being agile is to some extent inherent in the process. And if it's a major redirect, then we just have to work as a team to consider, is this the time to do it? What are the trade-offs? And make a good strategic decision as to whether and what to build into to the next iteration or cycle. That's my response. We've got, like I say, both Keith and Scott with us. Keith broke off and is dialing in by cell phone now, so audio may not be the same, but
I'm already back in. I'm already back in there.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's good. I can tell you're on cell, but you sound good. You're coming in clearly for the event. Since you chimed in, do you want to go first? For Pavel, asking about how do you handle the realities of change, the demand of change that may come into the picture?
Well, it's a interesting question because there's a thousand different directions I could take this in. So my apologies if my answer isn't quite what Pavel had in mind. But it reminds me of the time that I was working with a hospital chain, and they were basically, they were putting in EPIC, EPIC, which if any of healthcare is this huge thing. Even if you have instances that are nurses, doctors, what have you, or certainly if they're IT in the healthcare industry, then they know about this. It's a big thing that's happened over the last several years. So they're basically saying, well, the EPIC project is scheduled to wrap up in between 2 and 3 years. So we'll just kind of wait, and then we'll do our modeling then, because it will be a perfect environment. Everything will be wonderful, and we'll just kind of hold off. And of course, that's never going to happen. Projects like that, of course, get delayed, but also the moment that project is over, there will be something else that could potentially interfere. So I think the main thing to focus on is that a lot of times we forget that there can be substantial differences between how we store our data and the changes that are undergone, the folks that are in charge of storing the data, and what happens when we model. Now, it's not always the case, but a substantial fraction of the projects that I've been on, so common that it's probably about half. The modeling data that I was using was effectively offline during the weeks of the project. So then obviously you have to decide how to bring things in, but the vendors to a degree are making us more anxious about this than I think, because they keep on talking about how, if you have a modeling package that doesn't build the model, let's say like a neural net, directly on a bunch of Hadoop clusters, that you have an inferior modeling product. But there's really no reason why you can't take data offline, in some cases for weeks. You're always using historical data, build the model, and then deal with those issues during deployment. And that doesn't mean to say that suddenly it becomes easy, but the things that you're in the grip of at the moment, some of that dust may have settled, sometime later when you're ready to deploy the model. So that would be my 2 cents on that, Eric.
Those are great considerations. And as I take that, thanks very much, Keith. As I take it over to Scott, I'd say that when we're working with clients, we're also not just focused on the project itself. We're looking at how to build a larger framework for maintaining an overall practice. And as such, we're looking a little more broadly, and that in its own oftentimes allows us to be more flexible in redirection and how to consider whether to redirect and how to do so. So we want the organization to learn how to build an adaptable kind of a factory, analytic factory. So you've got different assembly lines in the same building, in essence, for building those predictive models. And should we, build a new line? Should we affect how we're working on the current line? All with the kinds of trade-offs that go with it. So those are great considerations. Scott, what would you say about the agile and the realities that can trickle into model development?
First of all, can you hear me? I had myself on mute.
Yeah, you're loud and clear. Sound great, Scott.
Okay, super. That's an excellent question. It's a question that every organization struggles with to some degree or more. I'll kind of build off of what you said, Eric. You built you used some of the words, you took some of the words out of my mouth. You kind of presented the big picture in terms of you've got a factory. Well, if you've got a factory, you've got a certain capacity that you can produce out of that factory. And so on a more tactical level, what you have to do is have to figure out how to allocate your resources. Ideas are a dime a dozen. But ideas can also be quantified to a certain extent up front and should be on a tactical level. It's one thing to have an idea. It's another thing to say, okay, what are the requirements that are associated with implementing this idea? What are the time constraints? What are the human capital restraints? And what are the costs? Not only costs in terms of the actual production of the project, but the postponement of another project when you've got a contention for resources. I'm assuming that in this case you're talking about, okay, we've got some ideas that we want to look at, but we've got other ideas in the pipeline, and we're dealing with capacity issues. Usually in those situations, on a tactical level, a good organization will recognize that predictive analytics, data mining, data science is a team effort, and we as analysts are only one part of that team. So there needs to be some type of quantification in terms of what a project is going to require, and then a team or steering committee or a meeting of project owners to decide how to allocate those resources.
Great considerations. Thanks very much, Scott. That's very helpful. And Pavel says many thanks as well. There's a follow-up question there as well, Pavel. I will keep that in a holding tank because I'll having more questions come in. I think some of our discussions here are encouraging more. And gosh, we're down to just over 5 minutes to run here. So let me hit a quick administrative question, and then I'm going to go on to a more tactical one. We'll start with Scott for the tactical question. Matter of fact, let me read the tactical question for you, Scott. You can ponder the response a little bit while I hit the admin question. I'll come right back to you. That way it gives a little advance. So Jean-Michael asks, consumer data sets often contain numerous categorical variables of character type. Do you recommend to convert ordinal categorical variables from character to numeric to use them in modeling techniques that use a combination of numeric and character variables? Do you expect numeric variables to be more usable to conduct feature reduction? Sounds a little more specific. Hopefully, it's still a worthwhile topic for the group. So hold on to your thoughts for just a moment, Scott. Just giving you an advance on the next question. Haben asks a very common question. Would you share the slides? Well, what we do to encourage live participation, we don't even record the session and post it. So we encourage live participation. We love the interactions. We love the polling, the Q&A. So we offer this live every month. So go back to the website and just click on webinar anywhere on the website. It's in the nav bar. And sign up for the next month's session. And come on back. Now, the slides are pretty much the same, but obviously the Q&A is dynamic. And you can come back and see it again if you were interested in the slides. Happy to have you again. And hey, bring some new questions for us. So back to Jean-Michael's question around the data, and let me know if you need me to reread it or if you're good to go, Scott.
I'm good.
Okay.
It actually is I'll say two things up front. It actually is a fantastic question, and the second part is I can tell somebody's got a little bit of experience because they're asking the question. We deal a lot with this in the course in terms of the model development part of it. Categorical variables can be helpful and they can be hurtful. And generally, the dividing line between those two happens to lie with how many particular categories do we have within a categorical variable. In general, the greater the number of categories, the more a particular modeling algorithm is going to complain about it. Plus, if you have a high number of categories within a particular variable, it can introduce bias within the model, and that bias is going to make something appear to be much better than it actually is in real life. So the second part of the question is, how do we deal with it? Well, there's a bunch of different ways you can deal with it. You talked about some transformations. Sometimes I will reduce a categorical, the number of categories into smaller chunks of categories. Sometimes I might create separate variables that only pick out the essence or the more important parts of the categories. We find a lot of times that we either don't have a good sample size, or they may index around average. For those that have small sample sizes or may index around average, I'll just omit those categories and work with a reduced set. Another thing that I've done that helps a lot is I will one of the interesting transformations is I will actually create a new variable that basically is an index of the categories. When I create the index, I don't have to deal with categories. Really, I've transformed it into a numeric variable that, if you've got a lot of categories, is a good emulation of a continuous variable. So you've got a lot of opportunities, a lot of options, but really the direction that you go is to have a lot of to know what these are, and then at the time you're doing your particular model build, you select the one that works best for that particular situation. There is no one transformation that works best across the board.
Outstanding. Hey, I think you spun that in a way that was tremendously of benefit to the entire group. Hats off for doing that. Thanks so much, Scott. Keith, is there anything you'd like to extend?
All I would say is I agree with Scott that whoever asked the question has been in the arena. That's absolutely how we spend our day, doing those kinds of things.
Yeah, exactly. And I had a pretty good suspicion, based on historical data from from the first poll, that we were going to have some great questions because it's a slightly more experienced group than we typically have. And like I say, the questions did start to come in a bit more. I'm going to invite those of you who have unanswered questions to go ahead and pose them by email or go to our website and use one of the inquiry forms that's there. John Murphy and Pavel, you have a follow-up question. Who else do we have? Ravi, Dr. Daniel, use first names only here. Feel free to catch us via the web, or my email is eric@. You've got the domain from visiting us previously. But at 30 minutes past the hour, that's 90 minutes on a webinar, which they say is taboo. You should limit these to 60 minutes. We do enjoy great retention on these events, and we're very flattered for that. But I'd like to thank our attendees today for your sustained interest and your active participation, as well as Scott and Keith for your great presentation segments and highly informative Q&A contributions. We'll follow up with an email shortly with some resources and suggestions that hopefully will be useful to you, and from there, we'll hope you've offered permission for us to stay in touch through the Modeling Agency's newsletter, and that you'll consider joining us at a public training event soon, and certainly keep next month's event in mind. So make sure to go to the website and check out the schedule and details for the August beta production and of any TMA's new online classroom courses. This is your one single chance to obtain this highly developed vendor-neutral content presented by the industry's most seasoned predictive modeling consultants at the deepest discounts we'll offer ever in exchange for your feedback in our initial online beta production. So make sure to reserve your space by Tuesday of next week for the August production, as the prerequisite material will be distributed starting on Wednesday. Now, if you don't have a training budget or your schedule just doesn't fit, but you'd like the guidance of a seasoned mentor, you might be interested in the Modeling Agency's Escort on Call program. Escort on Call is essentially a retainer account that provides remote open access to a TMA senior consultant. Simply open up an Escort on Call account. You can do that directly online, and you've instantly added a wealth of experience and capability to your existing bench. It's like having a rare analytical lead at your call without expanding payroll, administrating complicated contracts, or taking elevated risk on larger commitments. You'll get the answers you want. We'll guide you through it tactically or strategically. We'll show you how it's done, implement any data mining tasks you may wish to delegate, and then remain on call until the next time you need us. And meanwhile, when we're not actively working, you're not paying a dime. So a link to the Escort on Call description page will be among the resources included in the follow-up email. On behalf of myself, Scott, and Keith, thank you again for attending Predictive Analytics Failure to Launch. Have a very pleasant afternoon and evening, and this brings the webinar broadcast to a close.